Yeah, the extent to which evangelical opinion on Israel is shaped by something like dispensationalism or Christian Zionism. These are obviously difficult questions to answer, and conversely, how much is shaped by bias against the Middle East, bias against Arabs or Muslims. These are questions that sociologists, of course, ask all the time and are trying to get data on. That at least is one way to track this. I think I think a lot of things on this, but it's complicated, and partly because these types of biases and these types of theologies aren't entirely separable. Like some of them are implicated in others. And you certainly see this on the ground in an organization like Christians United for Israel, which is the biggest Christian Zionist organization in the country. They claim to have, more than 10 million members that are largely evangelical Christians, are very pro-Israel, lobby politicians at the local level, state level, and federal level on this. And if you look at the founder of that organization, John Hagee, pretty infamous for some people, famous for others, pastor down in Texas, he has elements of dispensational theology in his teachings, in the sense that he teaches the prophetic significance of the modern state of Israel. He has a somewhat esoteric but recognizable prophecy scenario that's going to include the rapture and Armageddon and all those types of things. And so this is part of what animates him. Another thing that animates him, though, is he comes out of a Pentecostal tradition that emphasizes prosperity teachings, and he sees supporting Israel as a key part of God's sort of the way God dispenses prosperity. God says in Genesis 12:3, "I will bless those who bless you," speaking to Abraham. Hagee thinks this is how, at least one way, God dispenses blessings. And so that's a whole nother sort of theological argument. And Hagee has been controversial because he has spoken out against different ethnic groups, including Arabs. He's spoken out against Muslims. He's also spoken out against it back some decades ago against Catholics and others. So he has a long record of sort of identifying groups that he doesn't like and speaking out against them. But it's a standard part of the Christians United for Israel package to talk about the threat of Islamic terrorism, as they would call it, or Islamic fundamentalism, the threat of Iran as a theocratic state that is threatening Israel. By the way, which I wouldn't totally disagree with. There's a real situation there, but this is part of the framing, the packaging that Christians United for Israel offers. And then, of course, an organization like that is totally bound up into the partisan politics of American elections as well, and is largely on the side of the Republican Party in terms of who they support, but in the past have also supported certain pro-Israel Democrats as well. And so that's all bound up into. It's really hard to separate these things, and it's hard to say that one of these factors is more important than the other in aggregate. For certain people, parts of this are more important than others. But that's part of the story of, you could say, evangelical politics in the last 50 or so years, is the way that certain political commitments, mostly conservative political commitments, have become bound up in certain theological commitments and have made those things really hard to disaggregate, at least when you're really close to the center of action, like at a Christians United for Israel organization. And so when you think about what is actually sort of making evangelicals tick, at least those who are really engaged on this, I think the best thing to do, if you're just trying to understand, is to understand that for people coming out of that world, these things are very closely entwined. And yet, if you're not part of that world, if you're like someone like me who does not see those things as necessarily implicated with each other, there's a way to sort of have optimism that you can converse with them and have conversations that are theological in nature, that try to deconstruct or push back against theologies that would somehow privilege the nation of Israel over other nations in the world. And you can do that without having to then also take on the baggage of all the other political commitments that someone coming out of that world would have. That's my sort of core optimism, is there are ways to talk about this issue without having to talk about all the issues. And it's very hard. Part of the structure of our politics right now is how everything is sort of bundled with other things that make it very hard to disaggregate these issues. But because if we're talking about talking to Christians about this, because there is a sort of theology that isn't entirely reducible just to politics, that this theology transcends America, it transcends the modern era, and it is universal. That there are ways to engage the theology without the rest of the politics. Anyway, that's my hope, that's my optimism, and that's what I hope to be able to do in talking about the history, is to be able to show how these things become bound together in time and place, meaning that they weren't always that way, and they don't always have to be that way in the future.